It wasn't officially mandatory, but we understood that we'd be fired for unrelated made-up reasons if we didn't do it. Out of the 6 employees in my corner of the building, I was one of only 2 people who openly had an issue with our genetic information being taken by our employer. If the others didn't like it, they made no mention of it. That's what made it so hard to figure out who the psychopath really was. The information was supposed to be private, but by Monday, I came in to find a card being passed around for Debbie's inevitable neuropathy. She sat at her desk, crying while the rest of us tactfully ignored her and stuffed a few dollars in the card. What could we say? She wasn't sick yet. That was also probably the first moment I noticed a colleague behaving strangely toward me. Clint was always a little standoffish, but he seemed nervous while waiting for me to sign the card. You probably don't want to put money in. That's totally fine. What? I asked, thinking I heard him incorrectly. I put in a $5 bill and handed it back. Oh, okay. He laughed nervously before moving to the next cubicle. By the time my ears had processed what he'd said, he was too far away to ask for clarification, so I leaned out of my cubicle and peered at him from afar. He caught me looking and, overcome by masked panic, he grabbed the card from Carla and dashed out of sight as fast as a restrained office walk would allow. I had no idea what that had been about, but it certainly made me feel weird. For the next 2 hours, my coworkers seemed to share a universal hesitation at my approach or requests. It was wholly unlike the atmosphere that we'd communally maintained in the past. We all dreamed of pay raises and promotions, and we'd promised to help each other out and not fall victim to the corporate backstabbing that had consumed so much of the rest of the company. Those conversations had faded over the past year of economic hardship, and I now found myself in an office full of suspicion and distrust. Jackson alone didn't seem bothered. He was in the break room when I went to make another pot of coffee, leaning dourly against the counter and staring down into his mug for lack of anything better to do. He said, "Damn shame we get fined for being smokers now, eh?" While making the fresh pot, I donned a wry grin that he didn't see because of his despondent interest in his coffee cup. "Company policy is voluntary and exists to benefit our health," I parroted. He gave a single cynical chest-raising laugh. "Or to expose our secrets. Did you hear they found out someone in this office is a psychopath?" My heart beat faster in my chest as the morning's strange interactions clarified themselves. "What do you mean?" I didn't see it myself, but apparently the manager left the genetic test results on his desk, and someone found them. He finally abandoned the deep search of his mug in favor of looking directly at me. "Carla says the tests found a psychopath among us. A legit emotionless monster who would have no problem murdering us if we so much as looked at him the wrong way. That's crazy." I grabbed the coffee pot early to slowly fill my own cup and nonchalantly asked, "Did she say who it was?" I wasn't really paying attention. "Oh, refilled." I headed out without another word. I had some idea who everyone thought was the psychopath, but it couldn't be right. I wasn't crazy or emotionless, and I certainly wouldn't ever hurt or kill someone. Had something gone wrong with the test? Nora was the only other person that had voiced an issue with having our genetics taken. I stopped at her cubicle. She turned and, after a subtle startled moment, she gave out a calm breath and said, "Hey, how's your Monday going?" Office decorum made it difficult to ask directly. "Pretty good." I took a sip from my coffee and also pretended to be fine. "Hear anything about Friday's tests?" Her neck tightened nearly imperceptibly, and her answer came about 2 seconds slower than usual. I did. The stress of the moment had me feeling numb, but I kept a pleasant face. "I see." Finally, she leaned forward and whispered, "But I don't believe it. The whole thing is bullshit." Moving closer myself so that nobody else in the office could hear, I whispered back, "I know, right? I'm pretty sure the whole office thinks I'm a psychopath now." That is what the test results said. At that confirmation, I clenched a fist out of confused concern, and I saw her tense. Releasing the grip, I told her, "It's not true. I don't understand this at all." "Maybe someone switched their sample with yours," she suggested, eyes wide, to hide their identity. Before I could seize upon that idea, we both saw the manager approaching, and I quickly scuttled back to my desk. Bob seemed not to notice my restrained dash across the aisle, and he approached with his typical dour resignation. On my desk was a post-it note with the words, "If you tell anyone, I'll kill you," and I quickly crumpled it up and stuffed it in my pocket as my manager overshadowed me with his towering but depressed presence. I had a notion that he was going to fire me because of the test results. Even though I knew logically they would have to wait a few weeks to make the firing seem unrelated, it still put incredible stress on me. In shock from the note and Bob's proximity, I forced myself to politely ask, "Hey, what's up?" Yeah, my manager said. "I have to inform you that some of the genetic test results were leaked this weekend. We're looking into it, but company policy dictates I have to inform you that the information has gotten out to parties unknown." I nodded and tried to suppress the intense emotions flooding through my every limb. He did it. He left the information out on his goddamn desk. Do they have any idea who did it? It's, company policy not to discuss details of an open case. He sniffled once. Anyway, that's all. He turned and began heading back down the aisle while I let out a breath. How had he not noticed my hand awkwardly jammed in my pocket throughout the entire exchange? I'd clearly been hiding something, but he'd been wholly uninterested. I pulled out the note and uncrumpled it. Staring at the words, I repeated them over and over. "If you tell anyone, I'll kill you." Was this real? Was it a practical joke? No, it had to be real. Nora and I had only just guessed that someone else had switched their sample with mine somehow. I knew I wasn't the psychopath, but everyone else thought I was, which meant they'd be too terrified to prank me in this manner. So who had left this note? The only person in this office who would have done it. The actual crazy person masquerading as a normal human being. To say I was paralyzed would be an understatement. My life was under direct threat. My life. But if I left my job, I would also lose my life, just in a different way. I couldn't afford to be unemployed even for a few weeks. But the note had said if I told anyone, right? I could just keep quiet and, no, I'd be fired in a few weeks for supposedly being a crazy person. If I didn't act, I would lose my job. If I did act, this person would come after me. Worse, I'd already told someone by way of Nora's guest that my sample had been switched. I leaned back in my chair and quietly scoped the other cubicles. Carla, Nora, Debbie, Jackson, and Clint. Which of my 5 coworkers were not who they appeared to be? My coffee was empty in short order as I nervously sipped and stared. I got up and began a slow walk to the break room. Did the tests verify gender? It was impossible to know exactly what the results had said. I guessed that Carla was the one who had seen them, since she was the manager's assistant and our office gossip. That also made it seem unlikely that she was the psychopath, because spreading the information would only hinder her position if it was her. I walked past her desk slowly enough to perceive a hidden nervousness in her that lasted until she was sure I wasn't stopping to talk to her. Clint was hard at work on his spreadsheets, but I could tell he was looking at me in the reflection in his glasses as I came up behind him. If the results included gender, then he and Jackson were the only other possibilities. Did the psychopath, whoever he was, have the same question? Clint's neck reddened from stress as I neared, and I moved on. His tendency toward awkward social interactions and math-related skills made him seem a likely choice for someone reserved and cold, but it occurred to me that a real psychopath would put on a better front. Was it someone more personable? Debbie had only just stopped crying. At the front desk, I lied about expecting a call from a client, but she rubbed her eyes with a tissue and shook her head. "No, sorry, no calls like that." "All right." I lingered for a moment. What if her inevitable illness was a cover? What if she'd switched the results and, oh God, what if I actually had the predisposition toward that disease? I didn't want it to be true, so I kept walking. The break room was empty this time, and a pot of coffee had been freshly brewed. That was strange. I was the primary coffee drinker in this office, and I always had to make the pot myself. What if? No, that would be ridiculous. But it wasn't. I poured the coffee in the sink and leapt back as an acrid chemical smell wafted up like so much noxious smoke. The coffee had been poisoned. Someone really had tried to kill me. After a few moments of panic, I forced myself to get a grip. I had to out the psychopath, and I had to keep my job. Calling the police would definitely get me fired. People would just see it as me trying to cover my own ass because I'd been outed by the genetic test. But who had been in here? Who'd made the coffee? I broke the pot and threw it in the trash to keep anyone else from getting poisoned by residue. Out among the cubicles again, I saw Jackson heading back from the bathroom. I used the opportunity to scope out his desk. His mug was nearly empty. Only a small bit of brown liquid remained in the bottom. He ignored me as he passed, and I detected the faintest smell of cigarette smoke. After a few silent sniffs, it felt like it was coming from an elevated source, and I guessed that he'd come up with a system that kept his office clothes clean, but he'd forgotten about his hair. Nora waved me close as I headed toward my desk. Who do you think it is, if it isn't you? The psycho. I whispered back. She nodded. We can't just let this go. We have to figure out who it is, or we're all in danger. Her interest suddenly felt strange to me given how everyone else in the office seemed passive about the whole thing. They did leave a note threatening to kill me if I told anyone. But then they left poison in the coffee pot anyway. Her face contorted with concerned horror. Seriously? Are you alright? Yeah. Her expression was perfect. It looked legitimate. I couldn't see any hint of malice in her. One thing I can't figure out. Wouldn't it look suspicious if I was labeled a psychopath, but then murdered hours later? Not if the cops think one of us did it to protect ourselves from you, she replied quietly. Shit. Good point. Wouldn't you do the same thing if you knew who the psycho was? No. I told her, still studying her reaction. Just being psychopathic doesn't make someone a threat or a murderer. All 6 of us have worked here for at least a year, and we've all been fine so far. She appeared surprised. You wouldn't hold it against that person? I kept my gaze on her eyes as I said, no. After a pause, I continued. You were the only other person to protest the genetic tests, weren't you? That doesn't mean anything. The tests are just wrong. Invasive and wrong. A slow nod was my only response. Bob was walking by the cubicles again, so I returned to my desk. I hesitated before sitting down, and my eyes caught sight of something nestled in the crack of the seat. Carefully pulling it out, I found that it was a needle full of some unidentifiable liquid. Disgusted, I crept out and threw it in Carla's trash because she was the only person not at her desk, and I didn't want to be caught with it. Nobody saw me do it, but when I sat back down, I saw Nora turn and look at me across the length of the aisle. We locked eyes for an uncomfortably long heartbeat, but then she turned back to her computer. As Carla returned to her desk, Bob unexpectedly appeared at my cubicle. Hey, can I see you in my office for a second? Surprised, I just nodded and got up and followed him. My 5 coworkers all watched me throughout what felt like the longest walk of my life. Clint looked subtly afraid of me. Carla looked eager for new gossip. Debbie was on the verge of tears again. Jackson's eyes were expressionless and cynical. The corners of Nora's eyes and mouth were perfectly curved just enough to convey a hint of concern for my fate. I entered my manager's office and Bob closed the door behind me, shutting me away from the stares of my coworkers. Someone official was already sitting within, and Bob introduced her simply as from Human Resources and offered me a chair. Overwhelmed by nervousness, I hardly heard his words as he sat behind his desk and began talking in his typical droning monotone. All I could think about were the various reactions of my coworkers and the emotions I'd read in them throughout my time here. Which had been real, which had been fake. Who among us ruthlessly pursued their own goals with no regard to right or wrong? Don't fire me, I blurted. I know who the psychopath is. Bob blinked. Huh? We're not firing you. My racing thoughts stalled, and I abruptly returned fully to the moment. What? We're promoting you, Bob explained. We need your ruthlessness at our management level. It's a cutthroat industry, you know. He began to smile, but the human resources lady shook her head dourly. Ahem. But what do you mean you know who the psychopath is? Are you saying there's been a mix-up, and it's not you? Part of me felt like laughing, but I suppressed it. Choosing my words carefully, I said, Oh, I'm not saying anything. I gladly accept the promotion. Great. We'll discuss details later this week. Until then, don't tell anyone about the change. We don't want to stir up office drama and all that. Of course. I stood, shook Bob's hand, and walked back out into the cubicle farm. While the others watched me warily, I headed for the break room. On the way, Nora caught my attention and whispered, Did you out the psychopath? Do you know who it is? Without looking at her, I said softly, It's all of us, Nora. Maybe not genetically, but it's all of us. I could feel her eyes still upon me as I entered the break room proper and began making coffee in an improvised filter. One of the cabinets swung open on a spring, and a small blade on the bottom shot toward me. It stabbed through the palm of my hand and out the other side. With gritted teeth, I pulled my hand off the blade, found an old company medical kit, and bandaged the wound up. And then I went back to making my coffee. This was life now. While waiting for the improvised drip to distill my caffeine, I began thinking of traps of my own to set, and of how I should safeguard my cubicle and the break room for my own defense. It was a natural result of being unable to leave, of being trapped with a multitude of other prisoners equally miserable and set against one another. It seemed that we had failed in our dream to remain friends, and the company's atmosphere of corporate backstabbing had taken us after all. I whirled around at times while waiting for my coffee to brew, expecting an attack from behind. But no, this hell would not be so obvious. I maintained a polite smile and nodded at my co-workers as I returned to my desk with my full mug, and nobody commented on the bloody bandage around my hand. Instead, they began passing around a card.